The sun was still low when the rider appeared on the ridge, a dark cutout against the pale morning sky. Dust followed him like a second shadow, rising and settling with the patience of something that knew it would be there for a long while. His name, if anyone still remembered it, had once been spoken with kindness. Now it was spoken only in whispers and mostly by men who slept badly. He had not always been a hunter of men. Once he had been a ranch hand who laughed easily, a husband who knew the weight of another body sleeping beside him, a father who lifted a small girl onto a saddle and promised her the world was bigger than fear. That world had proven him a liar. It had taken everything from him, then dared him to live with the memory. The town of Red Hollow lay ahead, crouched in the dirt like a guilty thing. Its single street was already awake, shutters opening, boots on boards, a saloon door creaking as if it sighed at the thought of another day. The rider reined in his horse at the edge of town and studied the place with eyes that had learned to look past faces and into intentions. Somewhere in Red Hollow lived one of the men he was looking for, one of the 6. He rode in slowly. He wanted them to see him. Fear worked better when it had time to settle. Inside the saloon, the air smelled of stale beer and old smoke. A piano played badly, the tune falling apart under careless fingers. Conversations dipped when the rider stepped through the door, then resumed in lower tones. He took a seat at the bar and asked for water. The barman, a heavy man with tired eyes, hesitated before pouring it. "You passing through?" the barman asked. "No," the rider said. "I'm arriving." That was all he offered. He drank, set the glass down, and waited. He had learned patience in the years since the fire, since the screaming, since the shallow grave he had dug with his bare hands while the ground burned his palms. Patience and a clear memory of faces lit by cruel laughter. The man he was waiting for tried to leave without being seen. He was a thin fellow with a scar on his cheek, the kind that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. He had once held a torch and waved it like a flag. The rider recognized him at once. "Tom Calder," the rider said softly. The name landed like a dropped plate. Calder froze. The room went quiet. "You've got the wrong man," Calder said, though his voice shook. The rider stood. "You were there," he said. "At my ranch. You tied my wife's hands. You laughed when my daughter cried." Calder reached for his gun. He was quick, but not quick enough. The rider's shot was clean and final. Calder fell, surprise still written on his face, as if he had never believed the past could catch him. No one tried to stop the rider as he left. No one spoke. Outside, the dust settled again. That was the first. There would be 5 more, scattered across a land that had taught him how easy it was to disappear and how hard it was to be forgotten. He followed rumors and scars left on the world. In Dry Creek, he found a man who ran a store and pretended to be respectable. In Black Mesa, he found a gambler who hid behind loaded dice and hired guns. Each time, the ending was the same. A name spoken. A memory recalled. A life ended. He did not enjoy it, but he did not look away either. This was work that demanded witnesses, even if the only witness was his own conscience. With each man he killed, the story grew. It traveled ahead of him, changing shape as stories do. Some said he was a ghost. Others said he was the devil come west on a black horse. Children dared each other to say his name at night. Men checked their locks and counted their sins. At night, when the land went quiet, the rider dreamed. He dreamed of smoke crawling along the ground, of his wife's eyes as she tried to be brave, of his daughter's small hand slipping from his. He woke with his jaw clenched and his hand reaching for a gun that was already there. By the time he reached the 4th man, the hunter had become the hunted. A bounty had been placed on his head, thick enough to make even cautious men reckless. They came for him in pairs and threes, thinking numbers would make a difference. They were wrong. He did not kill them with the same care he gave the 6. They were obstacles, nothing more. The 5th man was the hardest to find. He had changed his name, moved south, married into money. He lived in a house with white paint and a view of the river, and he told himself that the past had been buried properly. The rider knocked on his door in the early evening, when the light was soft and forgiving. "Do you know who I am?" the rider asked. The man did. His face collapsed under the weight of it. He begged. He offered money, influence, anything that might buy him one more sunrise. The rider listened because listening cost him nothing. Then he did what he had come to do. Only one remained. The leader. The man who had planned it. who had decided that a ranch on the edge of nowhere was an easy prize, that a family was an acceptable price for a night's sport. The writer had saved him for last, not out of strategy, but because some endings deserved a longer road. He found him in a growing town, fat on cattle money and political ambition. The man had guards, friends, a reputation carefully built to hide the rot underneath. The writer waited. He watched routines. He learned names. He stripped away protection piece by piece until the leader was just a man again. They met at dawn, behind a building still under construction. The leader tried to talk. He tried to reframe the past as a misunderstanding, a mistake made by younger men. The writer said nothing. Words had been used up long ago. When it was over, the writer stood alone with the body and felt nothing, no triumph, no relief. Just a quiet, empty space where a purpose had been. He buried the man because leaving him for the animals felt too much like mercy. Then he mounted his horse and rode out of town without looking back. The land did not change. The sun still rose and set. Town still grew and died. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere else a man did something cruel and told himself it did not matter. The writer understood now that his revenge had not fixed the world. It had only balanced a single broken scale. He rode on, not because he was running, but because stopping felt like surrender. The story followed him for a while, then faded as all stories do, replaced by newer, louder ones. But in certain places, when the wind came in from the west and carried the smell of dust and old smoke, people still remembered the man who hunted them down one by one, and they wondered quietly, and too late, whether the past was ever truly done with them. He kept traveling, the line between days and nights slowly dissolving. The revenge was complete, yet peace still refused to find him, like a mirage in the desert that turned to dust the moment you reached for it. He had believed that once the last man was dead, something inside him would loosen, some heavy knot would finally break. Instead, the silence within him grew deeper, wider, almost endless. One evening he stopped in a barren valley where caravans might once have rested. As he built his fire, he asked himself for the first time what lay ahead. The man who had hunted them down one by one, what reason did he have left to live? Revenge had become his identity, and without it he felt dangerously hollow. That night, as the cold crept into the air, he heard movement near his camp. His hand went to his gun at once, but the figure that emerged from the darkness was no enemy. It was an old man, wrapped in a threadbare coat, leaning on a stick, who stopped just short of the fire. "Mind if I share the fire?" the old man asked. He shook his head. The old man sat, stretching his hands towards the flames, staring into them as if they held answers. "They say you're the one from the stories," the old man said quietly. "They say many things," he replied. The old man smiled faintly. "Stories aren't always true, but they're never empty." After a pause, he added, "What's left after revenge?" The question struck harder than any bullet. He had no answer. For the first time, he realized he might not be the only man still breathing under the weight of the past. The next day they traveled together for a while. The old man was heading towards a distant town where his daughter lived. Along the road he spoke of wars, of loss, and of mistakes that followed a man no matter how far he rode. He listened more than he spoke, but listening was enough. Near the town the old man stopped. "Every man has to choose one day," he said, "whether he lives with his wounds or turns them into wounds for others." Then the old man walked on, leaving him alone once more. But the loneliness felt different this time. He turned north towards softer land, towards places where cruelty did not seem quite so proud of itself. Months passed. He took work on a small farm, changed his name, buried his past. He rose with the sun, returned tired in the evenings, and slept with fewer dreams. The village children grew used to him. One girl, about the same age his daughter would have been, often stood with him by the horses. One day she asked, "Are you ever afraid?" He thought for a moment before answering, "Yes, but I don't let fear decide for me anymore." Years later, his name had faded from the stories. Still, he knew what he had done would never truly end. The difference was that he had learned how to live with the weight, rather than letting it rule him. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, he looked up at the sky and for the first time offered a silent prayer, not for forgiveness, not for forgetting, but for the chance to remain human, no matter how brutal the world might be. The story did not end there, but the blood-soaked chapter did. What followed was a quieter life, simple and unremarkable, standing as proof of a man who had once been nothing but revenge, and who, in the end tried to become human again.